Have you ever felt completely uncertain if the choice you're making for your child is the right choice? Have you ever yelled at your child, lost your cool, vowed you'd never do so again, and then found yourself doing it again a few days or weeks later? If so, I want you to know we have all been there. Every parent has been there. When we become parents, it causes us to be under immense pressure. We feel that pressure because we care. It doesn't have to harm us. Pressure can be good. It can be motivating. After all, pressure makes diamonds. Welcome to the Parent Doctor Podcast. I'm Dr. Marissa Caudill, an adult and child psychiatrist, wife, and mother of two. If you're here, I'm going to guess that you're like me. You want to be the best possible parent for your children. You don't want to settle for just being a good enough parent. Maybe you're like me and that you're determined to be a cycle breaker within your own family. Here at the Parent Doctor Podcast, I blend neuroscience, psychology, and spirituality to give you the tools to confidently grow as a parent. Because it's not just about raising our kids. It's about reflecting, evolving, and becoming the firm but loving parents that our kids need to thrive. I believe in the power of intentional, mindful parenting to help our children see our lives as examples of a life worth living. That might mean making some tough decisions in your life about your relationships, your work, your friendships, your habits. Can that be hard? Yeah, sure. But anything really worth doing is not easy. And that is how we're going to reverse the teen mental health crisis our kids are facing. By leading with love, embracing failure, modeling resilience, and creating homes filled with understanding and connection. So whether you're a seasoned parent or just starting this incredible adventure, you are in the right place. If you find value here, I'd be so grateful if you could follow, rate, and share this podcast. It's a simple way to help more parents discover the support they need on their parenting journey. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. Hello. Welcome back to the Parent Doctor Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Marissa Caudill, and we are about to start season 2 with episode 13. I'm really excited because now I get to actually talk to people. I'm not just going to be talking to you all about diagnoses and mental illness, but rather about all the things that matter to us as parents. My goal with the Parent Doctor is to create a space and a community where parents who love their kids can come together, support each other, learn from one another, and get the real facts about what we know matters. And this is going to be basically a blend of neuroscience and psychology and spirituality to help you lead yourself into a place of empowerment so that you can lead your kids out of the mental illness crisis that we are facing, especially here in the US with our teenagers, so many of whom are depressed and anxious. And the truth is there are things we can do differently as parents that will help our kids. And I know that all of you are the answer. I, as a psychiatrist, and all the other psychiatrists, we are not the answer. It is what starts at home that's really going to help our kids to be healthier human beings with a better outlook on life. So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce to you my first guest today. It's my friend Candice Peuschel. She is a mom of 4. Her kids are all under the age of 6. She's a lawyer, a wife. She lives in the suburbs of New York City and New Jersey. And if any of you want to reach out to her, go ahead and look at the show notes to get her email. Here we go. All right, welcome back to the Parent Doctor Podcast, everyone. We are kicking off season 2, which is going to be interviews with various people with my friend Candice Peuschel. She is, get this, mom of 4. Her kids, 4 girls, are 6, 4, 2, and 6 months?
Yeah.
So, okay, already you all know that she is incredible and way braver than I am because I just have 2 and they're 4.5 years apart. It took me that long to be brave enough to have a second one. So, yeah, where do you want to start, Candice? I guess my first question to you is did you always knew you wanted to have 4 kids? I feel like in this day and age, 4 is a lot, right? I mean, 3 is a big family by modern standards, but 4 is next level. You're in a small group there.
So it's funny, and I look back, I have a journal from when I was 7th grade, that I did for a school project. And in that I wrote my future life plan. And it was pretty much a lot of what has come true. I did think I was going to have 2 girls and 2 boys. I have all girls. I mean, so
but you predicted the 4 kids in 7th grade.
4, and I have 3. There's 3 of us. My husband's one of 2. So we were supposed to compromise on 3. And thankfully it worked out, had 4. So I would say I always wanted 4. I honestly just thought the even number made sense. Like, I don't really understand why people stop at 3, except for the fact that like 4 is just like 3 is a lot. So then they like don't want to keep going.
Yeah.
But especially for us, like I still stand by it because I'm like the 2 older ones are like very close, and then we'll have like the 2 younger ones, and then yeah, 3 is always like a little can get
Three's
like
hard. Yeah, three's hard. I only know that from play dates because with 3, there's always like one odd man out, right? There's some kid who's feeling left out. It's very hard because you have the triangulation. So yeah, with 4, your chances of that are less.
right.
Although
And then
I'm
like
sure
in
it still happens.
but then in terms of like having them also like close in age, first off, my husband was like, I just want to like get this over with type of thing. But then also like I was a 7-year age difference from my youngest sister. And I like, so I wanted everybody to be
Close together.
close together. So, you know, it's definitely something. It's
well, I think that's amazing. So you predicted this in 7th grade. That's pretty awesome. You manifested it in some ways. Has it been what you expected, or have there been surprises?
parenting has been nothing that I expected. I remember when I had my first and I was home even like on maternity leave, and I like said to my friend, I was like, I thought being a mom would be like my answer to happiness. And I was like, and I recognized that it's not. Like, I guess I thought that was like the one ticket of like once I, you know, kind of like that idea of like getting to the next level, getting the next job, getting the next place. It was like, okay, once I become a mom, like everything in life will make sense, everything will be good. Like that's the and of course it's been a whole roller coaster of lots of downs and lots of just it's definitely not the I mean, I've learned now there is like first off, there's no external thing that could actually just make me happy, right? It's like, it's the same thing with having a kid or like getting married or, you know, like there's always like seems to be something else. So I think that's like the biggest lesson I've gotten is just like, there's nothing outside of me that's going to make me happy. It's really about what's inside.
Well, that's a pretty damn good lesson. And I think it's such an important lesson because I didn't learn that lesson until probably 2 years ago. So I was 45 before I really accepted that in my heart. I think it's so common for all of us that for me, because I'm in externalizing kind of masculine energy, like I was blaming my husband for why I wasn't happy. This was when we had 2 kids. I thought like having a second kid will make me feel complete. And then it was kind of the opposite. We were both working full time. It just became more to juggle. And I know you were the one who introduced me to that book and movie Fair Play. Like I very much resonated with that at the time because it was like, oh, if he were just doing more, then I wouldn't be so stressed out. Then I would be happier. But I had the same realization that you had that like, I am responsible for my own happiness, nobody else. And that's true for all of us.
Yeah. And I think that's very, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think it's especially like becoming married, like to your point, like getting married, having kids, it like all very much comes to life. And that's also, I mean, it's definitely something I daily have to work on and like that I'm like very aware of because I think it's very easy to slip into and very like normal stuff like blaming, you know, getting mad at other people. And so just really like I used to get frustrated, I think, by the message of like that it's about us and within us because I'd be like, don't you see I'm trying as hard as I can. And I like, can't get there. And so like, even like the book, like, you know, like a man's search for meaning by Viktor Frankl, like I just didn't understand how one could get there. And I think like where I'm at is just how much of it is really like actually like focusing on like not like focusing, like training my brain to like keep reminding myself that it is within me, right? Like I could look at a situation that my husband takes out the garbage or he doesn't, and I could get mad at either one.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely.
But ideally, no, I totally agree that for a long time, hearing someone say that, I would agree with it in principle. Like I remember reading Man's Search for Meaning years before we had kids. I remember sitting at my husband's baseball game reading that book. And I've read it like multiple times since then. It's actually on my nightstand right now. I'm reading it probably for like the 4th time. But that's a great example, right? That like, no matter the situation you find yourself in, no one can take away from you the fact that you always have a choice to decide what version of yourself you're going to be in that situation, right? But you're right. It's so hard when you are in that mindset of viewing yourself as not in control, which is ultimately like kind of a victim mentality, blaming other people, right? Taking away your power by ascribing the reason that things are happening to someone else or something outside of yourself. So what was the shift for you? I know what the shift was for me, but like, what do you think is the shift for you that helps you? Or is it a constant kind of work in progress?
I think it's definitely a constant work in progress. And a lot of it is awareness. So like I've now become like a true believer that like we have like we're born, right? And I get it's so cool to like watch now having like my fourth baby, because I like really like imagine this and watch it through her eyes of just like she comes into the world of this like pure joy, right? Like everything just like, and so she, to me, and everybody believes in different ways, like she has this like soul inside of her, like her spirit, right? And then as like I watch the different stages of my girls, I can see how like there's kind of like burdens, right? That like get put on them, and like parts that like come out. And so then I think for me it was like until I really started looking at my thoughts and like what were the things that were really going on in my head and writing it down, and then I could like face it. And for me it was like, wow, those are really scary, dark thoughts.
Shitty thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, like no wonder I'm a little sad, or like if that's like really what I'm hearing every day, multiple times a day in my head, like I could see why life feels.
Yeah, it's interesting. No, okay, so I think that's true. For me, that started, it's been like, I don't know, it's kind of like if you're cracking an egg and you like tap, 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 and you tap, 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 and then eventually just pops open. So I feel like it was many little cracks in that shell for me. Like I remember taking during residency this class called Mindfulness Awareness Practices, and I did the first version twice and then the second version. And I was trying to like build a meditative practice, but I never got into it except for when I was in the class. So I would meditate when I was there in the sessions, but somehow I never got into doing it at home. But even so, I still took something away from that because, like you're saying, quieting my mind and just having that space for those few minutes, it helped me see that like so many of the thoughts I were having were just really like self-critical, crappy thoughts. And like, no wonder I was feeling like anxious and bad about myself, because I was like, and I would just kind of laugh about it. Because when you do take the time to like see it as an observer. So I think you're absolutely right. Now, what I've gotten aligned with this idea of awareness is an approach called Advaita, which is an ancient approach from India. I have this like teacher who's teaching me, but the idea is that you don't even need to necessarily meditate. You need to just be aware in every moment, like you're describing, that you are this joyful, beautiful soul, and that we're all part of that positive, blissful energy, like you see in your daughter. And so now I'm able to connect with that more often, but it's still, that part is a work in progress because inevitably something happens and you get caught up in the here and now and the stupid decisions or things that are happening, or the bill that got paid late and the late fee and what, all the things that can make you feel like, what? And so it's hard, but it's easier each time I do it to kind of recenter myself in that awareness.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for both of us in our parenting journey too. Are you comfortable sharing kind of what you've gone through with your oldest daughter, like you told me about recently?
Yeah. So I think that was like, in my head, I was going to have very typical children, right? Like I remember even like thinking in my head, like I didn't know about like miscarriages. I didn't know about like anything. I was kind of like, okay, like everything's going to be fine, right? This is going to be my
I think that's how we all imagine when we imagine parenthood, like, I don't know, the very Leave It to Beaver or whatever it was, like this very normal family. Yes.
Yeah. So I started noticing like when she was, even a year, that she was like definitely behind from her peers when I like bring her to her mommy and me classes and whatnot. And then around 18 months, my mom, who's like a neuropsychologist, was just like, Candice, like, I really think you need to get her evaluated. And I like defensive, and I was like, oh, she's fine, but like, sure, I'll do it, mom. And in the evaluation, they where they said that she was like globally developmentally delayed. There was like concerns about autism, and it was just like literally like all red flags like popping up. And I remember like crying for weeks. Like
I
I
was
was
going
like,
to say, can we pause there and just go back to what that felt like for you? Because as a child psychiatrist, I've treated hundreds of parents who have gone through that process. But I do think that we don't get good enough at understanding what that's like. Because like you said, we all have this idea that our kid is going to be whatever it is, but it's not a kid with developmental delay or special needs, right? It's not what any of us imagine or fantasize about when we imagine becoming parents. And so what was that like for you and your husband when you learned this? Like, how, do you remember what thoughts you had? What, you cried for weeks. Was it like, did you lose sleep? What did you go through?
yeah, no, I mean, I remember like being in my office. So at that point, I was like in-house as an attorney, and just like literally like I would first off go down Google like
Yeah.
a
Rabbit
rabbit
holes.
hole,
Mm.
like being like Googling about like that if my kid has autism, like one day she's gonna be laughing and then the next day she's gonna like never laugh again. Or like I just remember like those were like the
Oh.
stories that I would like read about. I was like, John, we're never gonna see her laugh again. Like, and I think for John, he kind of more just like shut down, was like, it'll be fine. Like, kind of, but
Mhm.
I also like took it on me. Like this was like my responsibility. And also I just remember, and this was like for a long time, I blamed myself. Like where I very much was like, Briella got a UTI when she was 7 weeks. And so she was like in the hospital for 4 days. It turned out to be fine, but I was like, it's because of the UTI. If I had only wiped her better, right? Like if I had only
Mhm.
done this or whatever, like then none of this would have been the case. Or it's like, I didn't play with her enough, or I didn't, like whatever, how thinking even like to pregnancy. And like, honestly, at that point was my first pregnancy. I like wouldn't even take allergy medication because I was like so nervous about like doing anything. And she was like a breastfed baby and I was so careful. And, but it was just like anything. And I bring that up only because my attitude on that has completely changed after my fourth and working with like the motherhood center where like, I just don't think I know now that like none of that actually matters.
Yeah.
And that like none of it was like at all my fault. And if anything, I think the worst piece of it all was like that when I was pregnant with her, I was told like recommended to come off my SSRI. And I think like I stayed off of it for like even a while afterwards because I was like nursing. And I think that was like, like in hindsight, that just added to like all I can't even like I think it was just so stressful. So like
Yeah.
then finding out like that she had this, and I think I was like already pregnant. I was actually already pregnant with our second, who was like
Wow.
planned to be that fast. I just started a new job. So yeah, I mean I would just cry all the time and blame myself and think my life was over. And it wasn't even like she got an autism diagnosis or anything. It was like there was nothing, like there was nothing. Like it was
But
like
you were facing this uncertainty, which actually is harder. And I think what you went through is so, so common, whether it's with our kids or our own medical problems too. The same process tends to happen where we blame ourselves when there's a bad outcome in life. And we think about all the things we could have done differently or should have done differently, which is such a recipe for suffering because you can do that forever, and just imagine all the ways that things could have been differently. Whereas ultimately, again, you're giving your power to something that doesn't get you any farther forward in the direction that you want to go, focusing on what you can control, which is what you now do so well, is really what helps you. But I think that's so, so common. And I'm glad that you've gotten support to help you realize that. I think this is one of the things that I want to help parents see is there's so much that we can't control. I mean, so much of this journey with our kids is outside of our control. We don't have control over the kid that we're given, over whether they're healthy or not. And even when we do everything right, we don't have control over the choices that they make in their lives and the kind of people that they become. Not entirely, not even probably a lot. So much of it is who they are. And so I think, especially as kids get older and reach adolescence, that's a very hard part for parents to accept too. But where you were at, I can't imagine. And for people listening too, I want them to understand, like, you're an attorney by training. So you were working a big job at the time, right? Like full time in the city in New York. And that must have been so, so difficult for you guys.
well, and I also like didn't have, any background in like child development or like the body, or, you know, like I remember like even bringing my kids for cold, and there were just like basic anatomy things that like I passed over in science and math. So I was like, I'm a lawyer, like I don't need to listen
Yeah.
to this. And I think that was also like a big part of it, was like all of a sudden, because my like response to when things like this happen is I go like full blown like overboard in terms of like, let me call every doctor, follow every single like I went into like panic mode of like, okay, so here's a problem. How can I fix this? And so then I'm like talking to so many different doctors, and everybody's giving me different opinions, and like things are completely going over my head. And I'm thinking also like they know everything. So like I'm dumb, they're smart. I have to follow exactly what they're saying, even though honestly, a lot of them like wouldn't. It was more like there were so many things that they wanted me to do that it was just not possible. And everybody, like now in hindsight, like everybody has different opinions, right? Like even like what's the right thing in terms of child rearing is like, there is no answer. And it's all like in terms of which therapist am I talking to, which doctor am I talking to, everybody's going to have different opinions, the same way like a lawyer has different interpretations of the law.
Are you a parent who wants to read all the parenting books and you have maybe a growing list or stack on your nightstand, but somehow you just never seem to find the time to get to them? If so, I totally relate to you, and I want you to know I'm here to help. Every month on the third Wednesday, I read, summarize, and present a parenting book that I have chosen that I think is a great one. And I do this via Zoom. If you'd like to get into the Empowered Parent Book Club, go to theparentdoctor.com/book club. This is totally free. It's a public service that I provide, and everyone who signs up gets access not just to the replay in case they can't make it to the live Zoom, but also to an actionable PDF that I create custom for each book that we read. So I would love to have you. This is a growing community now of over 200 members. These are like-minded, engaged, energized, supported parents who want to be more empowered for the sake of their kids. If you'd like to join us, again, please go to theparentdoctor.com/book club. See you there.
So I think for me, it's the biggest part has been like really recognizing that like there is no right thing, because it's all opinions and it's all kind of like based on the kid. I mean, arguably there's wrong things, like you don't want to beat your child, and you know, like
Right.
there's like, but in terms of like, I don't know, I guess I still struggle with this in a way, because like sometimes it feels a little bit too much like surrender, and like how much do I force something on my kids, or you know, like but I really have just at this point, what I'm trying to practice is like by being myself and like being the role model for them through my own actions, that's like the right thing for me in terms of parenting. So not so much of like doing, which I think back then it was very much about like, what can I do instead of like, can I be?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. No, and I
I
think you and I are very similar in that, like, when we feel stressed, we go to like, there's fight, flight, or freeze or fawn, right? But no, I think both of us go into like hypomanic action mode. Like that's how I cope, and I know that's how you cope too. And there's certainly good things that can come from that, but you're right that ultimately, like, it makes you less focused on who you are because you're so busy doing that you lose sight of who you're being for your child in that moment.
totally. And if anything, I was in a worse place than I was before, right? Because like here, then I became like so stressed out. And I mean, I didn't even really like think about this before this conversation, but it was nobody really said to me, like, are you okay?
Yeah.
Like, you know, like what's going on for you? Like, you know, the occupational therapist, the special instructor, like they're
Totally.
like,
No,
this
I think
field,
the modern
you know?
medical system completely fails parents in this regard. Especially having worked in a big medical center where they were doing evaluations and autism diagnoses and developmental delay diagnoses and stuff. We just like dole out this diagnosis, and we forget that most people aren't coming from a background of understanding. Like most people are not speech pathologists or neuroscientists or psychologists. And so for the teachers, the lawyers, all the other people who are just like great people with great brains, but don't understand what this means, it's like a complete story flip, right? Like, completely unexpected. And we don't give people time to process it either. like the way our clinic visits used to be set up, and we'll be like, you have the evaluation and then everybody talks at a team meeting, and then you have a meeting to like deliver the news to the family, and then you give them resources and they're off on their own. And I think it's so alienating. So have you now found a community of people, or are you building that community yourself? Like, what has that been like for you?
Yeah. So I think also just to add is like, I think also a lot of times, especially like lawyer, but a lot of people are achievers. So it's like,
Mhm.
once we hear the diagnosis and we're told what to do, it's like, okay, here, I'm going to do everything. I'm going to get an A. And then
Yeah.
like, and that's like part of the panic. There is no A, right? Like there isn't like, and so then you're not only just striving for an A with no actual goals or guidelines to get there, at least that are like measurable. Um, so you're just like completely set up yourself for failure, and looking for like external validation that's never gonna exist. And so then in terms of like my own support, um, I think it took a while to get there. I think a lot of it, I got a therapist who really started off as like a parent coach. Um, and so, but she turned into like my therapist, which actually I think happened because I had a miscarriage in between my second and my third. And I thought like I was fine. And then I was like, I'm not fine. Like, and so she was like kind of like the only person I had like in my trajectory at that point to like even like reach out to.
Mhm.
Uh, so I think that's kind of like when it shifted into like more being about for me as opposed to like just like parent coaching for um my daughter. And I think that's like really when I started like realizing how much parenting like had impacted me as a person, and like that I was a person who had like career goals and self-development goals and all these things. And then I had a kid, and then all of a sudden I only focused on her. And
Yeah.
and I had another kid, and like but it was like, only thinking about them. Um so then once I kind of got that resource, then in our town there's like I would use like Facebook, I'd use like other like online sources. There's like a community group here. And a lot of it was like just talking to parents and like having the honest conversations. Uh, and I think for me, it was like also just really like time. And then I kind of was like ahead of the game in some ways, because like at that point I felt very much alone because it was like my first, and like a lot of people at that point were still like, oh, you're just being like ridiculous. Like she's 18 months, like leave it alone. Um, but then I started like, I think then I was kind of able to like process it through my own. I do a lot of journaling. I do like, I have a lot of that type of like internal work. And then I started talking to people and they would be freaking out about their kid who's now like 4 or 5 or whatever. And I think it kind of gave me perspective, like in a way,
Mhm.
where I was just like, it's gonna be okay. Like,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So I think it is important to like be able to talk to people and to be like real about it. Cause I think otherwise people very much want to be like, oh, everything's fine. And everything is fine. But like I just see it as like, why not get your kid extra support and extra like, and yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of parents who have kids who have special needs hide that. I don't know if it's intentional or not. I have a good friend, and her daughter was born quite premature. And it wasn't until years later, we were very, excuse me, we were very close, but it wasn't until years later that she told me that her daughter had mild cerebral palsy and that she took her to physical therapy like every week for the first 4 years of her life or something. Um, and I think even just that, which was a physical limitation, not a mental or developmental limitation, was something that she felt some degree of shame about, the fact that she didn't even tell her best friends. We didn't learn about this till years later. And she's like, oh, but now she doesn't have it. Like you said, she has that mindset of like, I want to get an A. I want my kid not to have this anymore. And now that she doesn't have it anymore, I can talk about it. But I think for things like autism, for things like developmental delays, like there isn't really an A. Like sometimes you can't fix it all the way, and you have to just love your kid the way they are. And so I think it's really great for you to be encouraging people to talk about it, because when you hide it, you're alone. And when you talk
Yeah.
about it, you'll find that there's more people than you ever expected who themselves have gone through something similar, or whose family member has gone through something similar, and you therefore increase your support network. So I think
No,
you
and I
like
mean,
talk.
for me,
Mm.
yeah, it also it like I now think of it as like the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because it got it threw me into this world of like learning so much. And like every time I would meet with like these different therapists or, like an OT, PT, like psychiatrists, doctors, everybody, it took a little time to get the confidence, but I started like really asking questions because I like was curious. I was like, I want to learn, like help. And because I think for me, I like realized that until I really understood understood it from more of like a curiosity perspective, as opposed to being told what to do, I needed to know the why. So it was like very hard for me when people were like, oh, and then you're going to brush her with like a brush for sensory perspectives or whatever. And I'm like, you want me to brush my kid? Like, I can't even get her to like, listen at all to me. So, but then it kind of like put things in perspective once I started to understand like more about the brain and neuroscience and like became more educated. And so I'd use everybody as resources. And then especially because this is my first child, like then I felt so much more educated and like empowered as a parent for my other 3 children, which like my second, in hindsight, like she should have been getting speech services when she was like 1 year old or like special instruction or whatever states call it. But I so listened to other people who were like, you're just being overreactive about your first, that then I like got embarrassed about like thinking that there was like, might need some help for my second. And then at 2, I got her tested for speech publicly and privately. And I was kind of told like, we think she's fine, like it's okay. And then all of a sudden at 3, it was like, oh no, she's really delayed. Like her speech is like really delayed. I'm just like, cool. Like we could have like started this earlier. And now she's almost 5 and like her speech is still delayed. And it's just so interesting to me to like see that like from starting earlier and there was such like this kind of like wait and see. And then I really feel like it like hindered her instead of helping her. So then with my third, I used that information and everything I'd seen with my first. And at 9 months, when she like wasn't really babbling and she wasn't moving, I was like, I'm calling early intervention. Like I don't care anymore if everybody thinks I'm like, this is like what I think. I've seen it now. And then like my fourth, like she's babbling and she's moving. And like my husband, I joke where he's like, so when are you going to start your own therapy? Like get therapy. I'm like, oh, I'm already. I'm like, like, but I think it's so like helped my own story because a lot of it was like acceptance and education and empowerment. And then, so I see it as like the best gift. And I think I would love for other parents like feel that way even early, like if they could like learn that sooner. I think like if that's what I could go back and say is like, it's going to be okay. Not because everything's going to be fine. It's going to be okay because it's okay. Right. Like it's fine. Like, so like and learning to like accept my oldest for who she is, like then help me to accept each of my kids for who they are because they're all unique. And especially having like 4 girls 2 years apart, it's like so interesting. And it like helped me like realize that like for me, I see my goal for them is like to help find their own passion. Like, so I like really try to look at like what's each of them like certain things starting from a young age. Like, how can I help them with that? And so like, it just has really helped me think about them as like their own individual people. And I had to like accept very early that I was a soccer player. I was a big athlete. Like I tried to get my kid to play soccer. Like she just cried on the soccer field, but like that was hard. And I had to talk to a therapist a lot about that of like, it's okay that she doesn't like soccer. And, it's okay that, so I think it really has been like the best gift for me, but because I found the support I needed and I put in the work, I would say, to like,
well, I think you found the support you needed, but you also were brave enough to recognize that you wanted to change or to bring that to yourself because the support's always there. What needs to change is our desire to seek it. Right. But you just put a lot of good things out there, which is kind of trust your gut. Right. Even if you don't feel like all the things, like if you feel like something isn't quite right, don't be afraid to be the squeaky wheel. And if one person tells you you're crazy or if one evaluator says, no, everything's fine. If you're still feeling like something's not right a couple months later, like ask again. Because definitely early intervention is, we know, like better than later intervention, but you've done a great job with all of that. And then talk a little bit, because we were talking before this about what we wanted to address. And we talked about self-care. I kind of hate that term because I feel like it evokes this idea of like women at the spa and like getting massages, which is certainly part of self-care, but what does self-care mean to you? Because again, you're not just raising 4 girls under the age of 6, everybody. She is raising 4 girls under the age of 6, 3 of whom have required extra help. Like, and that's a shit ton of work. Excuse my, like, how many appointments are you juggling? How have you, I want you to talk a little bit about that because you're super great about delegating and organizing all of your family life and your kids' needs while still being very present for them. So tell me a little bit about that part, like the organizational part, and then your self-care, like how you've maintained the energy that you need yourself to be able to be that, CEO of your family and organizing everything that your kids need.
Yeah. So it's definitely been like a journey, right? And it's come from a lot of different places. I think at first I was like, I have to be there for every single session and it has to be home and I have to like make sure. And then so I'd be at work and then I'd be like trying to like run home and I didn't trust like the nanny to do it. And so like first part of it was kind of like taking a breath and just being like,
Mhm.
oh, like I'm going to do the best I can. The best I can, meaning that it's not going to put me down by doing it. Because I think there's like, for me at least, there's very much this idea that like the best I can means I have to do everything I can for my kids. But it's like the best I can for me now means like keeping my sanity and keeping
Mhm.
my awareness. Because if I'm not okay, then my kids are okay. Or
Mhm.
my, right? Like it's amazing to me like how much everybody's like moods react to my mood. And like,
Yeah.
so for me, self-care is so much about and is so I guess first off, like everybody's so different. So I think for some people, like massages and getting their nails done and like all that like could be self-care for them because they might actually enjoy it. I don't. And for a while I was like, what's wrong with me? Like, why don't I enjoy getting my nails done? I now like have just accepted that like that's just not me. So like that's like by no means self-care for me. Um, but I think for other people totally is. So for me, it's like I really enjoy meditating. It's just like something I've like started 8 years ago before I got pregnant. And part of it was because I wanted to come off the SSRI. And I was like, oh, let me start so I started transcendental meditation. Um, Long story short, I'm back on an SSRI, everything is like, it all like, comes in, but it's like, I do really enjoy that meditation. And then what I've also like, even my meditative practice has like moved forward because then I kind of found that I was like using my meditation as an escape. So like in
Mhm.
it's like very much like just like becoming
Yeah.
silent. And so I like loved it because I was like, oh, like even on the subway in New York City, I'd be like, oh, I'm like in my own safe place. So now I kind of like use my meditation more kind of what you're talking about, like with an awareness of like my
Yeah.
thoughts, what's going on. Um, but I mean, I enjoy working out. Other people don't enjoy working out, but I do. I enjoy playing tennis. That was actually like a big part for me was I wouldn't even go for a run before without my kids because I'd be like feeling bad that I was like not taking care of them and I was like putting myself first. So I guess really the answer is like it was a big mind shift of like
Mhm.
the oxygen mask on first. And that was very hard for me. Like I was like, I cannot be selfish. I can't think about myself. Like everything has to be for the kids. And then once I realized, first off, by taking care of myself, I am taking care of the kids.
Yeah.
Um, but like, and that's okay. And that's like,
Oh, it's not just okay, it's what they need. I think that what you just said is so key that like how your mood as mom dictates the whole milieu at home, right? Like everybody else's mood. That's so true in my house too. And I would guess that's true in most people's houses. You know that saying, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. Like I do really think that as moms or as primary caregivers, right? Like in different families, that might not just be the woman. That could be like 2 dads and one is the primary one with the kids. Or 2 moms and one's the primary one with the kids. Whoever's the primary one with the kids, right? Whoever's the one who has the job that doesn't stop at 5 p.m. That person needs to feel fulfilled in their life overall, right? And like the work that they're doing is important. We all feel like the work that we do for our kids is important, of course, but it can't just be that for most of us. I think most women, most primary caregivers, I love my kids. I want them to be well, but my life has to have a greater purpose than just them and their happiness, right? So yeah, I'm with you. And then our bodies need different things. And I love what you said. Like I also meditated, like I told you, I took that class and I escaped with meditation. And even before that, I had started reading John Kabat-Zinn in med school and I was doing some meditations then. But it was that escape. And then I just never saw, like, for a little bit afterwards, it would kind of trickle into my day-to-day life, but it never translated the way that the Advaita awareness in the now has translated for me, and like being aware in the moment. Like, it was hard for me to take that calmness and peace of mind that I would feel while meditating and translate it into my stressful moments in real life, right? They felt like two separate things, two different worlds. So for me, that's been helpful to kind of translate that over. But for me, self-care also involves SSRIs and the Advaita. Like, yeah, one is good, the other is good, but together it's better. And I think there's no shame in that at all, especially in perimenopause. Like, I need my Prozac, and I'm not going to come off of it until years from now, if I ever do. And then it's been about surrounding myself with people who are, and this sounds so woo, I know, but like, who are vibrating at a higher frequency, right? Who are energetically at a different place, wanting to do good, wanting to better themselves, who aren't about ego and proving that they're better than somebody else. Like, and you're part of that community for me. But like, that has been a huge game changer for me, because in the past, when I was in different communities of physicians, we're all like lawyers, like, we want to be A students, we want to be the best. And if someone else is better, that means we aren't the best. So we are kind of ego driven in those communities and networks. And in communities of physician women, I don't know if it's the same with lawyer women, but I would guess so. There's often
Community of women lawyers.
What's that?
I said I don't even know if there are communities of women lawyers. That's how solo.
Oh, really? Oh man. Well, that's too bad. But like, I had networks of female physicians that were my friends, but where we bonded was often over the commonalities of low energy states, right? Like bitching about our husbands and complaining about the fact that they didn't do enough, and that we had all this burden of the childcare and working and running the household and all of that stuff, like they talk about in the Fair Play movie and book. Which it's not that it's not true. It's just that the solution isn't going to come. Your ultimate transformation is not going to come by focusing on that. It comes from focusing on what you can control and thinking about the result in the life that you really want to have, and figuring out how you can craft that with your partner. And until you let go of that resentment piece, you can't get there. You can't craft that, because
totally.
It's too much burden on them.
Yeah. I mean, I think about like even like the new mom groups that I did. Like, I did one when I had my first, but then also like third, I did one, and really it was like second time parents, whatever. And it was a bitch fest, right? Which, like, in some ways I felt good, but it wasn't really productive. It didn't like that. Still like went back angry instead of like, okay, like here's how I like, can kind of move forward with it. Or here's like what I could learn like from my husband. Like, what am I actually getting upset about? Like, what growth can I see in myself right now? Or like, what's triggering me? Like, thinking really like, and this is why for me, like, self-care for me is like really just having like time to think and like journal and like reflect. But it's like, I kind of try to turn into a game now, where instead of just getting mad, I'm like, wow, he didn't take out the garbage. Why does that matter so much to me? Like, what's going on that like that's so triggering? And then like it turns into like a fun, I mean, I geek out on this type of stuff. Like, instead of just going down that rabbit hole. And then like that just also very much has helped me like recognize that it's not about the garbage, right? Like it's
surprise, what?
And then like with my daughter, even like my oldest, who, I still get like infuriated at times, right? At her. She's like really somebody who like, I ask her to clean up and she looks at me and she goes, "You can't make me do anything." And I'm like, "You're 6. Like, I don't know how this is meant." But it's like, I really have now taken it as like, I mean, this has been true for a little bit. Like, she's like my greatest spiritual teacher. I mean, her and I would say, and also my in-laws, I'm going to throw them in there. But like the people who I'm the closest to and like who I get most reacted to, like what's going on for me, instead of just like continuing on. Well, like, and also like, it's no matter who I tell a story to, if I voice it in a certain way, everybody agrees with me. Right. So like, it's very easy for me to get the confirmation that like my husband should have taken out the garbage. My in-laws should have watched the kid. My daughter should have listened to me. And then like, I feel good in that moment, as opposed to like actually recognizing that like, I don't know, it's all like a game, right? Like, it's like, I could
No, you're absolutely right. So one of my coaches calls this like when she gives like an example of being at a conference and there was a woman who would get up to the buffet and always go up like first and then go up for seconds. And somehow this was like really bothering her. So she calls it like when it hits your wounding, right? There's something about someone else's behavior that resonates with your wounding, like your past, some story you've told yourself, some experience you've had in the past.
It's historical.
Yes, exactly. And so like trying to figure that out does basically tell you where your bruises are, your emotional bruises, right? Like where you still need to heal yourself in some way. So yeah, for me, we could spend a whole other podcast talking about our wounded, but you're absolutely right that kids do this. And this is why adolescence is particularly challenging for most parents, because that's when the wounding really like teenagers will just pound on those bruises, right? Because once they see your reaction, they're going to go for it. And yeah, your 6-year-old does that too when they're like, you can't make me clean up, but it's going to be a whole different thing when she's 16.
Right? Like,
yeah.
can you imagine? I have like a 12th grade, 10th grade, 8th grade, and 6th grade girl.
Right. All right. Well, this was awesome. So let's just kind of summarize because we wanted to talk about Oprah's 3 questions. We talked before the start here. Like our intention was to help parents know that there's not just one right way to parent. And we are all figuring out as we go, right? Like, and that's how it is. That's how it should be. And that's okay. And then your point of what matters was self-care. And I think we touched on that. Like everyone needs to figure out what that is for them. And it may be like having time to yourself to go get a massage or get your nails done, but it also may be just like tapping into who you really are through journaling or figuring out why something's bothering you by making it a game like you were talking about. For me, and exercise and SSRIs and all the things. For me, it's like really prioritizing my sleep. When I don't get enough sleep, I'm much more likely to take a depressive view of the world. I know that. Yeah, staying on my medication, exercising, that's something that helps me burn off my stress hormones and definitely improves my outlook on life, and surrounding myself by people who are challenging me to vibrate at a higher level and see things in a better way. And then what's important, you said, was kind of self-development. And I totally agree. And like basically focusing on yourself and how you can make yourself better for your kids, recognizing that that's the best gift that you can give them, right?
And because like also with your marriage, right? I was thinking about like, okay, if me and my husband go to shit, that's not going to really work so well for my kids either. So like,
yeah, exactly.
Like the ultimate. So to be my best version of me for myself, and then that permeates to like my husband and my kids in so many other ways.
Beautiful. I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.